Hi, Optimizers. This is JJ Rescas, and this is another episode of Optimizing Me, the show with top performers from whom we learn about their stories, their ups and downs, their habits, routines, and mostly their mindset. Our guest today stands as a renowned thought leader in the realm of nervous system education and more broadly, human performance. The way that he got into this path is inspiring to anyone undergoing emotional and psychological distress. That means each one of us, and we'll talk about that today. Fueled by an insatiable curiosity, he has immersed himself in areas such as emotional regulation and resilience, breathwork, meditation, and trauma informed therapies, and other ones. He's also the host of the Curious Humans podcast, a space to celebrate shared inquiry, explore self experimentation, and cultivate embodied wisdom. I know that sounds like a lot, and it's because our guest probably is one of the most inquisitive individuals that you've yet to encounter. And I would venture to say he's a polymath on the rise. His work has impacted organization leaders and their members, as well as individuals that attended his flagship course, Nervous System Mastery, from which I've been a student and personally look up to him. Without further ado, let me introduce you to Jonny Miller. Hi, Jonny. How are you doing?
Hey JJ, it's great to be here, and I'm flattered and honored by your introduction. Appreciate the
No,
kind words.
thank you so much. I was trying to just shine a little bit of light in there's so many things that you've done. So thank you likewise. So let's start. Let's start having this conversation to share light on your character. So who is Jonny Miller and what does it mean to be a curious human? Let's go with that.
Who is Johnny Miller? Gosh, well, I think I've always been somewhat curious ever since I was a kid. I think I went to a kind of very strict British boarding school where, let's say, curiosity wasn't encouraged. You're kind of taught to give correct answers and jump through hoops and pass the exams. And I think it wasn't until I left the traditional schooling system and went traveling and started a company that I felt like I gave myself permission to kind of follow my own curiosity in that way. And I'd say for that early chapter, the curiosity came through building businesses, through traveling the world, kind of more like externally focused. And then over the last kind of 5 to 6 years, I'd say that curiosity has been directed more inwards and like exploring my own inner landscape through the things you mentioned: breath work, meditation, introspection, these types of things. So what does it mean to be a curious human? I think someone who is just living their way into questions and constantly asking and wondering and kind of viewing life through this lens of wonder and mystery.
I resonate very much with that, especially because I think both of us have similar mentors or role models. So that's something that also
Mm.
goes on my end. And now,
Mm.
what was the change that was on the external curiosity that changed into an internal curiosity? How did that come to be?
Yeah. In my case, it came through personal loss and tragedy. I think for many people, it comes through a crisis of sorts, whether it's a health crisis, whether it's burnout, whether it's the ending of a relationship. In my case, I was engaged to an amazing woman who had bipolar, and one day when I was traveling, she had an anxiety attack when she was working as a junior doctor, and she ended up overdosing on her own medication, and she took her own life. And that journey through loss and grief kind of opened me up to both like how disconnected I'd been from myself in a way, which sounds weird because I wasn't unhappy, I wasn't depressed, but I just wasn't very aware of a lot of the emotional life that was kind of going on under the surface. And that journey really it took me to do a Vipassana meditation and then to do breath work and just really to learn how to like surrender to the grief that was there.
Mm.
And that was a kind of a multi-year journey, I would say.
Was that some kind of resistance against grief, or how come?
Mm.
Because not that many people become curious. What I see is when someone is grieving, they try to numb
Yeah,
or right.
totally. Totally.
So in
Yeah,
your
it's a
case,
great point. I think I remember seeing when I was younger, seeing adults who had lost someone close to them, and they'd almost become like these like numb, like almost like a husk or like a shell of a human being. Like there
mm,
was this like some spark, some sense of life force had gone from them, and I saw these older people, and I knew in myself my own capacity or my lack of capacity, let's say, to feel, and I
mm,
was like, shit, like I don't want to end up like this half alive husk of a human being, and so I think I quite deliberately made the internal commitment to myself to turn towards it and to really face it and feel it as much as I knew how. So
mm,
I think that's really what led me down that path. And in the beginning, it was really scary. I remember I did a 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat pretty soon after her memorial, and I remember waking up on like day 3 and having nightmares just of the incident going over and over in my head, and I couldn't speak to anyone, I couldn't share this experience, I felt very alone in it. Um, but but ultimately, I'm actually very proud of myself and the way that I did have the courage to kind of turn towards it as opposed to the default reaction, which is just to kind of busy yourself, numb yourself, go
distract.
continue, distract, like life is normal,
Mm,
which I could have easily done, and I think my life would be very different today if I'd
mm.
done that.
Was there any moment in specific when you made this decision to face the grief, or was it a progressive change? And what was happening in your
Mm,
narrative?
mm, mm. Yeah. Well, I think my experience of grief was that it comes in waves, progressively intense waves, and I think that each wave is almost proportional to your current capacity to feel it. And so these waves did get more and more intense as my own
Mm,
capacity to hold and be with that intensity increased. Uh, that
mm,
that was that was my experience of it, and I actually wonder. I have a kind of unproven theory, let's say, that the traditional 5 stages of grief that people talk
mhm,
about are actually just 5 ways in which we resist feeling the grief itself, and it's like
mm,
ways that energy of the grief comes out in some sort of kinked way because we don't yet have um, the capacity to surrender fully into that the intensity of that experience.
mm. What would you say? It is something that has been conditioned on us to not surrender, or is it
Mm-hmm.
an internal fear or something in our DNA that makes us move away from it? Because if there's an emotion and our bodies is capable of producing that emotion, why are we escaping
Mm-hmm.
it in the first place, right?
That's a great question, right? That is a fantastic question. Yeah, what the hell is going on there? Well, I grew up in England, across the pond, which we are famously a repressed nation.
Mm,
The stiff upper lip, keep calm, carry on. Like it's very much in the cultural DNA, I believe. Um, and yeah, I certainly learned, through no fault of my parents. I think they were just sharing what they learned from their parents and from, the schooling system. Is that emotions are somewhat almost of like an inconvenience, and they get in the way of
mm,
productivity, and certainly the kind of quote unquote negative emotions, let's say grief, guilt, shame, fear, like these are things that I intrinsically was taught implicitly to avoid, like avoid these things and chase, follow happiness,
mm,
these kinds of things. And that was, I think, the implicit story which has taken many years to deconstruct and replace.
Hmm. And I can relate to that one because I was born and raised in South America. Different set of
Mm,
constructs, right? And you're supposed not to feel something, and you have your coping mechanisms that are
mhm.
that are accepted by society, which are not very healthy. Let me tell you, right? so so
Yeah,
I can
yeah.
relate to that. And something that also it reminded me based on what you were saying, once we humans are hit by emotional distress, we go into hiding mode. And in
Mm,
my
mm,
case, I remember my first year here in Austin, when I moved here, I a situation with a person that I was dating at the time created this, triggered in me something that I didn't know that was going to happen, and that simply broke the entire emotional structure within me. And the cognitive mind is not even there, right? It's not there, but you can
mm.
feel it completely.
Mm,
This obliteration
yeah,
of something, and
totally, totally.
like you, for example, I said, wait a second. In those glimpses of awareness, glimpses, because otherwise I was gone. I was a mess, an emotional mess. But in those glimpses, a question arose, which was, what's
Mm,
happening? What's happening, and
mm, mhm,
how do I
mm,
come back to awareness again? So
mm.
in your case, it started with vipassana, and then what else happened after that?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I really resonate with what you shared, and there is almost a sense of like some sense of ourself does get obliterated, and I think that's a kind of an important piece to name. But I think often it's like it's the protective parts of us that the parts that are maybe no longer serving that get obliterated. And in my experience, on the other side of that obliteration, there was actually an enormous amount of freedom and what I would describe as like raw aliveness, a sense of like deeply connected to the world, and to the point where I remember actually being quite confused. There was a moment where I was kneeling in front of the memorial bench and just like sobbing, like kind of hands on the ground in the sand, and there was almost this like ecstatic experience, almost as if I'd like taken ecstasy at a rave or something, and I was like, what the hell is going on? Like I'm meant to be feeling sad, but yet I feel this good, but yet this terrible thing has happened, and it was like it was very it was fascinating and confusing at the same time, and it completely twisted my um, that very simplistic, basic, untrue model of like grief equals bad, and
Mm,
it's much more complex, and I felt like it was almost opening up my system and kind of like almost like these kind of tidal waves of intensity that were clearing out the gunk and like the kinks things inside my body,
mm,
so that I could feel more and kind of increasing my capacity to feel not only grief but also love, also joy, also these other things.
mm. And you mentioned something interesting. There was a pre-assumption that grief equals bad, which means that for some people, happiness means good, right? So
Yeah, right, totally.
that is interesting. Okay, so this inner adventure started on at that stage. How did you
Mhm.
end up with nervous system? It's like you really want to know about yourself. You get to the core of what a human is. How did
Uh-huh,
that
uh-huh.
transition happen?
Yeah, yeah. So it was I mean in hindsight it kind of makes sense, but at the time I was just following yeah, like I really gave myself permission to follow my curiosity, honestly, in different areas. And initially, as I mentioned, that was the 10-day Vipassana. I had that experience and I was like, wow, I felt like I really meditated for the first time, despite having used meditation apps for maybe 5 years before that. And then I kind of followed invitations to Bali, and during a freediving training, I experienced breathwork for the first time in the sense of a breathwork journey, and I had an experience there, and I was like, "Oh my gosh! Like what the hell is going on here?" And that was like another moment where I was like, "Wow, there's something fascinating here that was previously unaware of." And then I also had invitations to plant medicine ceremonies in the UK and elsewhere. And those experiences also kind of gave me another. another lens for this kind of internal exploration. And then, like as I was doing this combination of kind of breath work, meditation, plant medicine, I was coaching startup founders, people like myself, in a previous life, and running emotional resilience workshops and teaching principles for kind of recovering from burnout and how to be emotionally resilient. Like, what does that mean? Doing some research. And as those workshops kind of went on over time, I realized that the nervous system kind of self-regulation and breathwork parts were the most compelling for the people in the workshop. And during this 6 month breathwork training I did in Bali, um, I was introduced to this whole, like, nervous system language through polyvagal theory and through how our breathing impacts how we feel. And something just clicked for me that in some ways all of these different experiences I'd been having had been functions of different nervous system states, and that actually what I was seeking in each moment was like a certain nervous system state.
Mm.
And the crucial piece is that these can be consciously controlled or altered through things like the breath as a bridge, and that they are, whether or not we're aware of it, um, our nervous system is impacting every moment of our life experience. It is, as I came to see, like the lens through which we're perceiving and interpreting reality. And yeah, and the more that I just went into this, I was like, wow, this is so interesting. And it connected to so many different fields that I'd been previously curious about, from things like authentic relating and circling practice, and it's like other like esoteric things. And I was like, well, I'm just gonna see what's here, and do some research, put together a little curriculum, and yeah, and that's kind of the story.
It seems that it was quite successful. Putting all of
It's
that
it's
together.
it's doing okay. Yeah, it's doing okay. We had like 80 people in the first cohort, which in hindsight was way too many. I was like, my nervous system was overwhelmed with with that many people. I hadn't really prepared for it. And yeah, the last one, which we ran in spring, had 250 people in, which is, yeah, I think it speaks to, there's a kind of growing appreciation for the type of work that you're doing, and the fact that many of the stories and the models that we've been given by the medical system, by other systems, just simply aren't working, and people are feeling more empowered, I believe, and kind of trying these previously slightly kind of out there things like breath work, seeing that there's now some science literature studies backing them, and more importantly, feeling the effects, and I believe kind of using these body-based somatic interventions, they're actually able to get to the root of the challenges in their life,
Mm.
as
Mm.
opposed to taking a pill, taking SSRIs, taking medication, or just talk therapy,
Or talk to.
which
Yeah.
whilst I know it has benefit for some people, I don't sense that it really gets to the root of the issue for many. I believe there has to be some kind of embodied experience or reliving of the previous experience that was challenging. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, I think it's a really interesting time to be kind of in this space, and it's exciting. Yeah.
Hmm. So let's go now into the specific theme of nervous system, or nervous system. So the majority of the people, sometimes at the beginning of the breathwork sessions, I will say, "Hello, nervous system. This is JJ's nervous system that salutes you," something like that, right? So that they get to
Uh-huh.
like, "Hey, wait a second, do I have a nervous system?" So it's like they don't.
Uh-huh.
It's
Yeah.
completely out of our awareness, but like you said, is this central component that
Mm,
helps us to perceive reality internally, externally, every single second, right?
mm,
So,
mhm.
what makes it important to learn about the nervous system?
Mm. Well, um, many things. I think, like you say, awareness that we all have them, um, and that the frame that I like to give um, is one around living with agency and intentionality versus reactivity. And I think that most people can relate to a time in their lives where they've um, something has happened. Maybe someone said something to them, a certain situation, and they've then been they've reacted in a way which didn't feel like it was in line with their integrity or in line with what they how they would have liked to show up. And the reactions could be anything
Mhm.
from overwhelming fear to anxiety to going into shutdown, closing off, anger. Like there are all of these defense mechanisms or strategies that our nervous systems have and that we learned when we were young, which maybe helped us back then in that situation, but now no longer are really serving. And so, what I think is important is bringing awareness to uh, both these different nervous system states and kind of the range in which our nervous system has, and then how to consciously shift these into a state that is more adaptive to the particular situation. Um, yeah, that's kind of the main thing that I like to share. But I'm also, I mean, I'm curious for you as well. Like, how do you think about that question?
Hmm. In my case, it is. I take it from the angle of we are so well versed in respiratory system and circulatory system and reproductive system and digestive system, right? And that's at least from the perspective of school or traditional school. But nervous system is not
Mm,
simply it's not simply the nerves and everything that is connected, but also the neurocircuitry in our brain. And sometimes
mm,
what I will tell people, Johnny, is you, a nervous system is an ever-changing snowflake, meaning all of us
mm,
are hardwired in different ways, and on top of that are changing, right?
mm.
Are
Yeah,
constantly
yeah,
changing. So I liked what you mentioned about the different, what I would call technologies, healing and thriving technologies, meaning breath
mm,
work, plant medicine, talk therapy, action therapy, you name it, somatic therapies. And my approach is that because every nervous system is unique, there is not a one size fits all solution or add-on for everyone. Yeah, breathwork may work for me, but in this and this and this and these conditions because of my lung capacity, because of my nervous system state, my HRV, you name it, right? But the same one to you, even though we may have the same height, the same upbringing, and the same very, very similar concepts, it's not going to be fully. So we need to craft it. So that is when I call, at
mm,
least in the realm of breathwork, precision breathwork. How do we craft a tool or a technology
mm,
or a combination of technologies so that we can heal and optimize the nervous system of the person?
mm.
That's my approach.
I love that. That's great. I definitely resonate with that. Yeah, I'm wondering if there's anything else that I would add to that.
Now let
Um,
me ask the opposite. What is the price that as a society, modern society, we're paying by not learning about the nervous system or by lack of awareness? What's the price that we're paying?
mm, that's a great question. Well, I would, let's see, I would make the fairly bold assertion that the majority of challenges which humanity is facing today originate from dysregulated nervous systems. Um, and to back that up to some degree, I think that all of the um, whether it's conflict within organizations, whether it's um, growing for the sake of growth and kind of taking from our natural environment, that these are being propagated by humans who have dysregulated nervous systems. Um, in the sense of they uh, don't feel safe in some way. They are operating from a place of reactivity, essentially. And that shows up on the kind of on the individual level, in the kind of family household level, and in the organizational and societal level. And I believe that by bringing awareness to these like maladaptive patterns, and then giving body-based tools to create more regulation, to create more embodied safety, that these maladaptive strategies, and that could be someone just shouting at their kid at home, or it could be the CEO of a company that's like destroying the Amazon. Like that, it plays out on many different levels. But my theory, my thesis is that much of this stems from um, an internal lack of regulation or capacity to regulate.
mm,
Um, so I think it's very fucking important to put it mildly.
mm, to
Yeah.
assess, yeah, to assess where we are, where our nervous system is at any state. Because like
Hmm.
you mentioned, we are constantly connecting with other people and making decisions that may impact many others. But if we're doing
Hmm.
it from a suboptimal state of being, oof,
Hmm.
decisions are going to be suboptimal equally, right?
Yeah,
Huh.
and for people that are in positions of power, positions of leadership, like those, their nervous systems have disproportionate ripple effects on the people in that company. So one way to think about this practically is we're constantly co-regulating with the other nervous systems around us. So like you and I, through our voice, we're kind of
Mhm.
communicating information which our body is interpreting and kind of using that feedback. And like right now, I feel very safe. I feel in my body. I feel like playful. I'm kind of having fun. Um, I read a study last week that shows that married couples who co-sleep together, their heart rate variability will literally entrain while they're sleeping because they're co-regulating. Like our kind of heart rate rhythms are literally syncing. And I say like we are the average of the five nervous systems that we spend the most time with. So there is this sense of like we are constantly like instruments, kind of tuning up or down with the people around us. And so by bringing one, say the leader of a company, by bringing their instrument back into tune, then that's going to have an effect on all of the other employees, people that their business touches. Um,
Hmm. Now, talking about this relationship with self, right? Relation because in order to regulate ourselves, we need to be attuned with ourselves,
mhm,
and that relationship, personally, how I see it, is a dysfunctional relationship, right? If I feel how we see here many things in the US is if I feel tired, guess what? I'm gonna go get me a cup of coffee, right?
mhm,
Or if I cannot sleep, I'm gonna pop up melatonin pills, right?
mhm,
Or and so on and so forth. You name the substance, and we can talk about, for example, Jamie Wheels stealing fire and how he talks about the altered state of consciousness industry and how we're changing constantly because an altered state of consciousness comes
mhm,
from how we're perceiving the world, how our nervous system is perceiving the world. So,
mhm,
what is, in your perspective, a how are you seeing the relationship that nowadays, as a culture, at least on this side of the planet,
mhm,
what's the relationship that we're having with our nervous systems individually, and what would be what's the mistake that we're making in our relationship with them? Let's start with that.
mm. Yeah, great question. Let me think about that.
Mhm.
What comes to mind is I think the narrative which many of us subconsciously believe is that our states we are victims of our environment. Like something happens and it causes this reactivity to erupt in us, and then we need to have something outside of ourselves, be it coffee, be it Adderall, be it like alcohol, in order to then fix that thing. And there is inherent in that there is this lack of agency and this like kind of victim mentality. And I think what is starting to shift, and what I'm hoping to share through the work that I'm doing and the work that you're doing, is that we actually have a lot more agency over our internal state than most people believe. And so in the literature, things like um, alcohol, cigarettes, like these are known as defensive accommodations, and they're basically strategies for downshifting or upshifting the nervous system because there is that lack of internal capacity. And so I'm what I want to teach people is that we have these inbuilt mechanisms for upshifting or downshifting without needing any substances, without needing anyone outside of ourselves, and that we have everything that we need to feel grounded and to feel okay and to feel great. And I believe that is starting to shift. In particular, the work that's coming out of MAPS and Johns Hopkins with the psychedelic studies as well. I think that there seems to be this kind of cultural shift that is emerging, And uh, yeah, it's like the future is here, but it's not evenly distributed yet. It's still, the wave is still kind of unfolding.
Mm. I was thinking about this the other day. Sometimes my nervous system comes with these ideas, especially during shower times, for some
Yeah.
reason.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Probably because you feel relaxed and you feel it in your
Exactly.
body and you feel the water. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the
I'm the
reason I have
same.
a notepad, a waterproof notepad, like arm's distance, so
Well,
that I can
I love that.
shower.
That's great.
The point is that I was thinking about this. If I am very honest with myself, nothing is under my control.
Mm,
Nothing is under my control. I have to be very honest. Nothing. But there is something that I can influence, not control, but
mhm,
influence, which is my breath, right? And so when there is this emotional turmoil, when there is chaos internally or externally, the
mm,
only thing that I can influence and through which I can influence myself and therefore the world is one breath at a time, one breath
mm,
at a time. So that's what I was thinking, is like, this is so important to have a great relationship or to be aware of our breathing patterns, because thanks to that is that we can influence, not even control,
mm,
influence or
mhm,
change the
mm.
bias on that.
Yeah, I really appreciate that languaging. And the way that I like to think about it is almost like you're right, like nothing can actually be directly controlled, but we can create the conditions for a certain state to arise. So I think sleep is a really good example of this, where you can't just like think, all right, sleep, and it happens, but you can like take a hot bath, go into a dark room, light a candle, like these things which increase the likelihood of sleep just happening. And the same is true of regulation as well. Like there are many ways, the breath being one of the main ones, that you can create the conditions for this sense of calm and regulation and groundedness to be present. I think it's a very important distinction that you made.
Mhm. Now, Johnny, if you could give a person one or two pieces of advice, like Pareto principle, 80-20, right, to help them transform their relationship with their nervous system, what would they be? What would those pieces of advice would it be?
Well, like you said a moment ago with the snowflake, everyone's nervous system is different, and so different recommendations will very much depend on what someone's experiencing and what someone's nervous system is. Something that I've noticed is that in our culture, the majority of people seem to be overstimulated and seem to spend too much time in this kind of what's known as high tone sympathetic activation, kind of go, go, go state. And that what most people could benefit from is more, yeah, yeah, me too. Me too. I'm in that category for sure. So, what most people, myself included, could benefit from is more time learning how to access the downshift and like the deep rest. So I interviewed Kevin Kelly recently, and he said, if you have a great work ethic, you need to have an equally great rest ethic. And so I think cultivating that rest ethic is what most people that I come across, certainly in I imagine listeners to your podcast in the high performing space, could benefit from. And there are many ways to go about this. I think something like NSDR or non sleep deep rest is a great starting point. This can just be 15, 20 minutes a day, maybe between 2 to 4 p.m. after lunch, when your body has this like natural dip in its energy due to our circadian cycles. Um, and having certain practices for downshifting and down regulating, so that we can then wake up the next day, the next week, and still have that very healthy increase in cortisol, increase in adrenaline, these things, and do the things that we love to do. Um, but I really believe that having practices for downshifting are really, really vital, for a lot of people that I meet.
Now, let me ask you, what are your downshifting practices?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I aim to do an NSDR practice most days. I don't make it every day, but most days at least 20 to 30 minutes. I work from home, so it's I just go upstairs, go into the next room. Um, I I tend to I do like wake up in the morning, take the dog for a walk, do a workout, do sauna cold plunge, and then meditate for ideally kind of 20 to 25 minutes. And that meditation as well is like a way in which I really ground and downshift and kind of enter a more expansive place. Um, and then, yeah, for me, I've been exploring play, honestly, like playing squirt gun with our puppy in the garden. We like fill it up and like squirt it, and she like jumps and tries to catch the water in her mouth.
Mhm.
And there's something very nourishing and restorative about play. It's not productive in the traditional sense. Like no work gets done, but I think it's actually very nourishing, um, particularly for people like myself, and again, I imagine your listeners who love to be productive and to get things done. Um, the notion of
Mm,
play can actually be quite intimidating because it's like, well, what am I achieving here by playing this game?
mm, mm,
um, so yeah, play is one that I've been exploring, and I tend to use breathwork these days more for in the moment things. So maybe before a podcast conversation or um, before jumping on a workshop or something, and sometimes in the morning before meditation as well.
hmm. That is super interesting. And going back to the quote of Kevin Kelly about having a strong work ethic and equally a rest ethic,
Hmm.
there it seems to be that there is this type of diminishing or lack of proper respect to the word respect or even recovery. Something that I didn't realize, Johnny, is that I've been using the word recovery
Hmm.
for years, but English is not my first language. So what happened is that I didn't have an emotional association to the word recovery. Guess what? I
Mm.
happened to realize that many people here get triggered emotionally by the word recovery,
Mm.
because they think
Whoa,
it's like recovery
interesting.
from alcohol, drugs, you name it, right? And in
Yeah,
my
yeah.
case, I use it because for me, rest is pause, is stopping to work, but recovery is recharging the battery.
Mm.
Obviously, you need to
Hmm.
rest and then go to recovery. And one
Mm.
of the ingredients, key ingredients that I evangelize is play as part of
Mm.
recovery. Because
Hmm.
if there is no play, then what's the point? And even at work, if there is no play
Yeah,
during
yeah,
work. By the way, do you know? I
yeah.
think I think they are in Colorado. It's called the Institute of Play, and so I can send you that later the information. So yeah, the Institute
Cool.
of Play,
Yeah,
which they have how to apply
amazing.
play frameworks for adults. So I've been diving
Great.
into that as well.
I love
Nice.
that so much. Yeah, yeah, and you're totally right. I think we've not really, and I mean, I like think of the analogy to professional athletes, where I think that is one of the realms where recovery is really understood pretty well, where they'll only be able to be in their kind of peak shape for maybe 1 or 2 weeks of the year, and they really understand that like if they're not sleeping like 10 sometimes 11 hours a night and they're not eating the right things, they're not recovering, then all of the work they do in training is basically for nothing because their body isn't going to be adapting. And I think that the same is true for those of us that use our creative capacities for work, but we just don't appreciate that recovery is just as necessary in this realm as it is in the physical.
And many people think around performance that, like you said, is only for athletes or only for artists. I have
Hmm.
a workshop called the Breathing for Performance workshop, which is based on how do we incorporate breathing techniques during the day to day for everyone. And for example, right now, you and I are performing. What are we performing? A connection, right? We're
Hmm.
connecting with each other. Even by yourself, if you are trying to solve a problem or be creative or you name it, plan a project, we are performing constantly. So
Hmm.
I do believe that there is also a disconnection between seeing someone who's super productive or the superstar of some sport and ourselves, right? It's like not
Hmm.
even owning the responsibility of our own performance in our current duties, which clearly takes people to this sense, like you mentioned, of victimism or victim mentality at some point.
Hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's well put.
So, what is your definition of optimal performance or the optimal performance of a nervous system?
Mm. Wow, what is optimal performance for a nervous system? Hmm. I would say a nervous system that hmm, has high capacity, high resilience, and dynamically responds to the environment. So let me unpack each of those terms one by one. What I mean by high capacity to be both with intensity and high capacity to downshift and to rest and recover. So capacity at both ends of the spectrum. Resilience I define as like how well you can go from being in like active go into then relaxation and downshifting, like the speed and the efficiency with which that happens. Um, and the dynamism piece I think is crucial, because it's about like are we in the right state at the right time. So for example, like like right now, if I was in a deep relaxation kind of dorsal state, it wouldn't be very helpful for this interview because I'd just be snoring into the microphone, and like that would be useless. Even if I had an enormous capacity, it would be irrelevant. So it's about being able to kind of to fine tune in the moment and to respond appropriately to what the situation is asking for. So I think that's how I'd define it. Yeah, but I appreciate the
So
question.
to respond to the demands at the moment of the moment, right?
Yeah, and respond with a sense of expansive possibilities. Like what often happens when we get triggered. I know a lot of people don't like that word, but when we get into
Yeah.
reactivity, it narrows our sense of possibilities, and we feel like we have to just go down one option. And when we're regulated, when we're grounded, when we're in what's known as ventral vagal, there is much more expansiveness, and there are many more options available to us. And so I
Mhm.
think it's almost about like it's increasing the optionality in each moment, you could say.
Mm. Something that I loved so much from NS Mastery, Johnny, was that we had a plethora of tools so that we didn't have to start from zero or build our own tools for up regulation, for down regulation, especially because my theory is that techniques, we don't have a problem in techniques right now. We have plenty of techniques. But what it happens is that when we are in the midst of chaos, all of them are gone, right? It's like when you have a list of
Mhm,
places that in your mind that you say, I want to go check this restaurant, this one, and this one, and this one, and then
mhm,
Friday night, someone says, let's go have dinner. Where? And you forget all of those ones. Right? It's nothing like that, but in terms of in
uh-huh,
terms of stress. So
yeah.
from those techniques, two questions. So, what are a few techniques that you would suggest, whether for up or down regulation, and most importantly,
Mhm,
how would you encourage a person to embrace or embed them so that that moment when it's most needed, it's right there?
mm. Yeah, I mean that's a fantastic question. I I would say I'd say a number of things. Firstly, start training as with anything in a low stakes environment. So like practice this with a friend, you know, someone that you that could be a family member, and like build that muscle so that when you're in that kind of challenging environment, let's say like I know the shit is hitting the fan at work, or there's some kind of crisis, that's like the kind of playing the game on hard mode. That's like the 10 out of 10 challenge, and you need practice to build up to the point where it then becomes second nature for you to kind of want to do a breathwork practice in that type of situation. In terms of the practice that I've personally found the most effective in those types of situations, for me, the main two go tos are a physiological sigh, which is something that Andrew Huberman has talked about a lot, which is where you kind of take a full inhale in through the nose, a little top up, and then there's this like effortless, relaxed, like there's this like and there's this kind of like letting go with the breath. That's very quick. You can do it in literally a few seconds. And then the other one that I've grown to love is known as alternate nostril breathing. And sometimes I'll do this in public, but more often than not, I'll just like go around a corner. I'll like I've done it in so many bathrooms, man, over the years, like first date, like before, like at like social gatherings, a TEDx talk. I did it once behind back. I was like backstage, just like breathing. um, that's been honestly one of my go-tos, and it for listeners, it's basically a breathing in for a count of 4 through the left side, holding for 4, exhaling the right side for 8, and then swapping and doing the same thing. Um, and
That's
then
hilarious. It's like, what is, because otherwise he's like, what is this guy sniffing, right? You're
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah. Like, is he snorting something backstage? Like that's not good. Yeah, I don't want to get people in trouble there. I realize that could be misconstrued.
yeah.
And then the last one I'll mention, which I do, for some reason now I associate it with getting in freezing cold water, is known as the single breath hum. It's basically like humming through your nose, and you can amplify the effect by. It looks really weird, but you put your fingers over your eyes, your thumbs in your ears, and then your ring finger kind of on the bridge of your nose. And if you hum, then it amplifies the vibration in your sinus cavity, and this has a very rapid calming effect. It releases nitric oxide, it does a bunch of other things. And I find that particularly if I'm going into water that's like, just above freezing, then doing that for like 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and I'll feel like I can really feel my system downshift in real time. So those are my main go-tos for if I'm overstimulated or anxious or overwhelmed and want to kind of ground. And yeah, I recommend trying it and practicing and noticing how you feel before and after. And the more often that your body makes that correlation between, oh, like 2 minutes ago I felt like this and now I feel like this, the more that connection gets solidified, the more that it will occur to you to do it in situations um, where you might not have previously thought about it. And again, doing it, every morning before meditation is a great way to practice and to build that muscle memory so that it does become more natural. And then if I'm feeling kind of like sluggish, maybe I haven't slept very well, and I have to get on a podcast or something in the morning, I'll do what's known as breath of fire or Kapalabhati, which is basically just rapid exhales through the nose. It looks a bit like I'll do 20 of those. I'll do a breath hold and then relax. And 2 or 3 rounds of that again releases adrenaline, releases cortisol, and I'll find myself being more awake without getting like the jitters of caffeine or things like that.
And just for the audience, to contextualize the audience, this techniques take 2-3 minutes. It's not something
Yeah.
that you need to spend lots of time. Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's
that's.
free. It's zero cost. You can do it pretty much anywhere. I'd love to kind of reduce the stigma around this being weird. In my dream future, people would be walking in a street and just doing breathing practices while they're like shopping for clothes. I love for it to just be like normalized and not have this like stigma around
Yeah.
doing
The
weird
one
things.
the one that I don't know yet how to do in public is I've been doing it for months. I inspired by Joe Hudson, the shaking, right? You shake it.
Oh yeah,
That's
yeah,
that's the one I don't know how to do
yeah.
in public yet without looking like a weirdo. I
I
will do it
think you just
anyway
have
though.
to just move to Boulder or Bali, and that's your training wheels.
I will definitely do that. Nice. How are we doing with time? Is that okay? Do you still have time?
Yeah, yeah, I'm good.
Nice.
Good,
I wanted
good with
to
time.
ask now, Johnny, what is your definition of a successful day? What makes it a successful day?
A successful day. Oof. Wow. Um, hmm. Hmm. I love the question. My definition has changed a lot over the years. If I think about it in this moment, a successful day is one in which I felt connected to myself, connected to those that I love, and that I've been able to share my gifts in some way, shape, or form. um, and that the day has had some form of like grateful surprise. Uh,
Mhm.
yeah, which kind of speaks to that, like creating the conditions piece. Like, I can't control everything, but it's more of like a perspective, a way of perceiving, such that I'm receptive to being surprised or feeling gratitude for a specific thing.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, that
Ooh,
feels like a successful day to me.
wow.
Mm,
That means that it includes wonder and gratitude as elements of your day to day, and that's a conscious
mm,
decision.
mhm,
Looks like that, or a conscious perspective.
mm, mm. Yeah, I would say one in which I've created the conditions for wonder and or gratitude to arise. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Huh. That's beautiful. Thank you very much. Another question. Okay, these are it's gonna probably
These are great.
maybe
These are juicy. It's fun.
I don't know. I think you have already answered this one in other podcasts, but let's see. What was something that you unlearned in recent years that improved the quality of your life? Belief system, story
Mm.
that you were. What's something that you unlearned?
I unlearned that I can be loved in my anger. And what I mean by that is that I can feel and express my own anger, and that it can be uh, a gift in some situations to others.
Mhm. Would you be able to contextualize, because many people are repressing their anger, which is getting somatized, and we know all the story
Mhm.
around that. So what does it mean to appreciate or love the way that you put it? How did you get to that realization?
Mm. I came to it in during a breathwork journey where my teacher actually said those exact words to me. He said, "You are loved in your anger," and lo and behold, anger came forth. Um, in this is in a breathwork journey. But what I've come to appreciate, and this is partly thanks to the work of Joe Hudson, who you just mentioned, um, in that as long as anger isn't being directed at someone else,
Mhm,
when it's just being expressed and allowed to come through, it can actually be a beautiful, like, catalyst for aliveness, and it shows you what you care about, and it allows you to set boundaries as well. It allows you to kind of say a generative no to certain situations, and I often find that in myself and other people that have very bad boundaries or lack of boundaries tend to not be connected to their sense of anger. And for
mhm,
me, that showed up as people pleasing. It showed up as being like the nice guy in relationships that would then get trampled on, all these different things. And yeah, and just like finding the, like, I'm just feeling it now, like finding like the power in that aliveness that comes with, like, for me, aliveness has been very connected to my sense of like power. Um, so reconnecting to that has almost like opened this wellspring of like of yeah of power and possibility in my life. So that is something that I definitely did not have access to in my early years.
mhm. It's it's beautiful how once we start connecting with our emotions, they serve as messengers to teach us something, right? Sometimes we deny those messengers or
Hmm.
those opportunities, and we are chopping or inhibiting the full human experience that we're having.
Mm, yeah, beautifully put. Mm.
Hmm. Thanks for sharing. That was fantastic. Thank you, Johnny. What's next in Johnny Miller's agenda in the upcoming weeks, months?
Yeah, so I'm kicking off another nervous system mastery cohort in, gosh, pretty soon, like 2.5 weeks time. So that is going to be my full. attention until November, teaching and running that experience. And then yeah, I'm doing a breathwork retreat with a good friend of mine in next spring. And yeah, and otherwise following my curiosity, keep doing the podcast, um, getting outside, going for adventures here in Boulder, Colorado, and hopefully having more conversations like this. Like I really really enjoy dropping in with people like yourself, and
Thank you.
I find there's always like new things that arise, or like slightly different perspectives. So yeah,
Yeah.
hopefully more of this.
Thank you. And also sign me up. Let me know about the breathwork retreat. Totally down
Cool.
to geek out and breathe together.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be fun. That'd be fun.
We're getting to the end of the conversation. I wanted to ask, we've talked about different people that you and I know each other, but who are the people who were or who are your current role models? I do believe that
Mm,
we choose our, it's like very much, Austin Kleon and what's it called? Still Like an Artist, the book. He has something
mhm,
beautiful. He has a beautiful diagram of you cannot choose your biological parents, but you can choose your intellectual parents. So who are
mhm,
your
mhm.
intellectual and soul
Mm.
parents in that sense?
No, I love that question. Yeah, I feel very fortunate in that I've been blessed to speak with several of them through my own podcast, through Curious Humans, um, and I consider each of them to kind of have like a piece of what it means to be a fully expressed, mature human being, or to kind of be on the path to be an elder in our society. The people that come to mind immediately are um, Joe Hudson is one who I've also been fortunate enough to spend time with in person, and he is even funnier, and there's just an amazing human being. I have so much respect for his work. Jim Dethmer was someone I interviewed recently, who's the started the Conscious Leadership Group, and I just felt this sense of like incredible joy and presence welling up in myself as I was speaking to him. There was just something about the way he was showing up that was just this. It was so beautiful to witness. Um, I have a lot of respect for Derek Sivers, who I also spoke to recently, who I think has lived one of the most unconventional lives that I've ever come across. Just this like incredibly quirky, bold, again like polymath, like professional musician, business owner, writer, full time dad now. Derek is another, and then let's see who would the last one be. Hmm, Probably a guy called Soyu, who was a meditation teacher at the monastic academy in Vermont, and he he was an incredibly impressive human being, and just had this sense of like fierce, loving clarity and power in every word that he spoke. And there was this, yeah, just like seeing him as almost like a generative kind of like father figure in some ways.
Mhm.
He had this like father energy about him that was it's just beautiful to be around.
Hmm. Thanks for sharing. And now it's time for me to research them all. Clearly. Yeah. I'm going backwards. I'm going reverse engineering. Okay, if he learned this, yeah, that's
Yeah,
how my mind
I feel like
works.
that's what we're doing with podcast. We're just like reparenting ourselves and getting to speak to, people that we like. Like, will you be my dad?
Literally, that is it. So not of record, but at the beginning of this call, I told Johnny, wait a second, I need to regulate my heartbeat because it's as soon as you showed up and you say hi, JJ, I was like, he's there, right? Like a groupie. So I really look up to you, Johnny. I consider you one of my mentors. So thank you very much for the work that you've been doing.
I really appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate like the playfulness with which you show up is uh, is fun and is a gift. So yeah, thank you for
My
that.
pleasure. Now, where can people find you? Can find more about nervous system mastery and all the other projects like the podcast and everything else. Where can we find you?
Yeah, so the podcast is just Curious Humans on most podcast players. The Nervous System Mastery course is nsmastery.com. The cohort's starting in a couple of weeks. And I've actually just released a free online email course called Five to Thrive, which is basically 5 days of emails with a kind of a breathwork regulation practice each day to practice. And that's free of charge. That's at 5tothrive.email. And I can share the links with you as well.
Yeah, please. Yeah, we're gonna put them all in the notes of this episode. Is there any other
Awesome.
thing that we need to put another note here that you would like us to put besides Five to Thrive?
No, I think that feels like everything. Yeah, thanks so much.
Nice. Johnny, in closing, and this is a variation. This is so interesting because the first time that I listened to your podcast, at the end, you do exactly what I do. So I don't know if we copied each other. I don't know if we copied someone else. Who cares? But I did a variation of the last question. In closing,
Okay,
if you
hit
could
me.
leave the audience, if you could leave the audience with a question to help them optimize their nervous system, what would that question
Uh-huh.
be?
Is your relationship to your nervous system serving you in this moment?
Hmm. Let me land that one. It's landing right now. I can feel it. So that's great. Thank you so much, John. It's been an honor, like I mentioned, and I know
Ah,
that we're gonna meet soon.
well, I'm grateful that my work allows me to connect and meet people like yourself. So this has been so fun for me as well.
Thank you so much, John. Okay, guys. If you guys enjoyed this conversation with Johnny Miller from the Curious Human podcast and Nervous System Mastery, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to receive notifications for upcoming interviews. That's all for today. And as always, keep learning, keep optimizing. See you soon.